Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is another conversation with Ruben Swint, the generosity guy. Lots of great responses from our last episode. So, very excited, Ruben, to be with you again and for us to unpack some of the basics of growing generous givers in our congregation. I think that many of us are looking for ways to develop uh, a discipleship of stewardship, if you will, to bring faithful giving back into our congregation. Uh, we definitely want to challenge our church folks to grow in their generosity. And Ruben, you gave us a great overview of your own work the last time we talked. So we're just going to jump right in if you want to this morning. Thanks for being here. And my question as we start is, how do we begin this discipleship of stewardship journey? How many steps are there? What might we expect from it? Give us some insight into that.
It's great to be back with you, Bo. I enjoyed our last time together. I'm enjoying this. Um, I would say the beginning step is to have already conceived and embraced your mission, or in some cases, churches use a vision statement, but know who you are, why you're where you are, and what you're being called to accomplish there. My simple question is, what are you trying to solve? And hopefully it's larger than having enough money to pay the bills. So I think what you're trying to solve is to grow generosity in your congregation. Uh, and that's a great witness to a wider community of the generosity of the God we serve. You know, if we cannot find generosity within our situation, then why are we talking about such a generous God and grace available to all? So we have to kind of use that, I think, as an example of how awesome our God really is. My framework for doing this in churches, I call it the Generosity Seven. And this is 7 basics for developing faithful stewardship and growing generous givers. And I use both those words. I use stewardship and generosity because we have different generations in our congregations who respond to giving with different terminology. And we still have the builders with us. Thank goodness. They are some of our most faithful, dedicated givers. And they find themselves, many of them late in life, asset rich, and they're willing to be generous with their assets. And then we have younger folk than they in other generations who don't have assets, but they have income, and they're willing to make lifestyle changes in order to accomplish the giving they feel led to participate in. So there are 7 basics, and I can list them for you right now. One, and these are going to sound odd, but we'll unpack them. One, churches have no needs. And I said that in a congregation one time, and they said, well, why did we ask you here? We don't have a need. Well, I'll explain that. Churches have no needs. Two, this is probably my favorite basic. There is more than enough.
Yes.
Three, words are worlds. Four, churches have multiple identities. And there's some churches out there you might even say are schizophrenic. But nevertheless, giving itself is a spiritual discipline. Our wealth, whatever it is, must flow. And finally, generosity is an app for life. That's the Generosity 7 that I recommend congregations embrace, begin to believe, and to practice.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. Uh, we will have an article that follows up and gives you just a brief paragraph on each of these that we'll be posting after this video post. But today we're going to dig a little bit deeper and look at a couple of these. This will be actually a 3-part series that we're doing to give an overview of these. Today, we're looking deeper into the first two. Churches have no needs, and there's more than enough. So, what would you have us to know about each of these?
Churches have no needs. The most common mistake I encounter when I review a congregation's printed material, digital online material, where they are encouraging giving for a variety of reasons, but usually because church leaders feel like, well, we're behind. We have not giving up to that 1/12 of our annual budget through several months, which is a common practice, but they feel the need to encourage the congregation to step up its giving, to get, quote, on track with what is essentially an artificial number. So what I encounter is this statement: we need you to give more so we can pay our bills. In other words, it's the needs of the institution that are being promoted. And obviously, I have no questions about this. Churches need to pay the cost of ministry, which are many and varied. But that's not the strongest appeal that a church can use with its members or any group of individuals. The stronger appeal is to give to people. So when I say churches have no needs, I do not mean that needs don't exist. They do. Churches should give to the needs of people. In other words, churches are providing ministry solutions both to its own members and also to those in its community. And these solutions are addressing real human needs, and that is a much stronger pull for the offering dollars. An appeal to sustain or bail out the church as institution is a weak appeal. An appeal to help people is a strong appeal. If your church is not in the business of helping, healing, saving people, then there's little reason to give. So I say shift your focus to your main reason for existing. And I don't know what each congregation's mission statement or vision is, but I summarize your mission as helping your members become better people who will work and give for a better world. And we all would move towards living under the reign of Jesus Christ as Lord. And the reason I state it that way is because I believe our members are resurrection people. People who are raised from the waters of baptism into fullness of life. That was the scripture when I was baptized at 9 years old. And they are a community of life and of love, and they're on a mission from God. Their mission is to bless people, and in doing so, bless themselves. That's another thing that I'll talk about later with one of the basics. They give to reach people, they give to welcome people, and they give to be able to say, you belong here if you want to. So churches have no needs, people have the needs, and focusing on the people the church is helping is basic number one in growing generosity in your congregation.
So, shifting ministry to the reason for existing goes back to that mission statement or vision statement that we talked about in the very beginning. And I would promise that most of the churches I work with don't have any idea what their main reason for being is. They could say the Great Commission, but unpacking that, they wouldn't have any understanding of that. Basically, the churches that I work with, they just want people to tithe. So if everybody would tithe, we wouldn't have any problems. We wouldn't have any problems paying our bills. We'd be able to give over and above to missions, and we'd be doing exactly what we shouldn't be doing. So isn't the solution to this everybody just tithe?
That is not an uncommon question when I work with churches. And it's usually asked by someone who's 70 years of age or older,
All
because
right.
that's what
Be
they've
gentle
been
now.
doing
Be gentle.
since they embraced tithing, and they have enjoyed the benefits of tithing, of which there are many. They just don't understand why people don't get on that tithing train. Well, several reasons. One, we stopped teaching tithing years ago, decades ago, in fact. I grew up in an era of church life where we had Sunday afternoon, early evening classes that taught us how to be good church members. And giving and tithing was one of the principles of that. We had every year, an emphasis on tithing in our churches, and people signed up for it. But nowadays, we don't have that training. We don't have a confidence in the pulpit or through the newsletter or online to talk about tithing. I see a lack of confidence. People are kind of afraid to talk about it. And the offering plate dollars have a lot of competition. One competitor is the unbelievable explosion in the number of nonprofits in our country, which is a good thing. People banding together to do good service, but they are also asking for that offering plate dollar, and they know that Christians are their best prospects. And secondly, the other competitor is the consumption lifestyle of North American Christians. We all live probably in bigger homes than we were raised in. We drive fancier cars than the first one we bought. We take more, entertaining vacations than we used to take. I remember taking a vacation with my parents in a 57 Plymouth Savoy, and when we stopped to eat, it was at a state park, and we opened the trunk, and there was the ice chest and the cold roast beef and the mayonnaise and the lettuce and tomato, and that's where we ate all the way to Washington, D.C., So our lifestyle has expanded as well. Tithing is still a great principle. It's a wonderful practice for the Christian believer. What we primarily fall into the trap of is say, y'all tithe, and if you don't, you're not necessarily a good person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't take that approach. I take the approach of the giving path. Will you get on the path? Will you give with us?
Yes.
Not to us, not for us. Give with us. We're in this together, and start somewhere, whatever it is, weekly, monthly. And every year we'll ask you, do you want to move along farther on the giving path? And somewhere down that path, may take a while, is tithing. And again, do you want to get at that level with us? And the other thing I'd say about tithing, there are people who have been stuck at the tithe for decades.
Yes.
And the
they
nature
reach
of
that
tithing
as their maximum level and quit, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I've reached nirvana. When in fact, the New Testament says, give in proportion to your wealth. And there are folks in our churches who could afford to give beyond the tithe. And some do. I talk to them regularly.
Yep. So let's shift gears, because what you just said sets us up for basic number 2 of your magnificent 7, if you will. There is more than enough. You're telling me I live in a big house and I drive a fancy car, which is not necessarily the case. But regardless of where we find ourselves, there's more than enough. So talk to us a little bit about that.
It's my favorite basic. I think one of the things I encounter the most when I consult with churches is fear. And it's related to, we don't feel like we have enough. We're not meeting budget. We're year after year taking monies out of funds to supplement our ministry costs. And it's fear. And what that basic does for me is it releases the fear. It gives us an opportunity to talk about it. But then it's an opportunity to embrace the fact that there is really more than enough. And my progress in that understanding comes from an essay written by Walter Brueggemann, a renowned Old Testament theologian, professor, who wrote this brilliant essay called The Liturgy of Abundance and the Myth of Scarcity. And in his study of the Bible, Brueggemann says that there's this subplot running behind all the stories in the Bible. And the subplot is that our God is a God of abundance and not scarcity. And that what the world is telling us is it's not enough. So you've got to get your own and you've got to secure your own. And then the worst thing of all, you've got to hold on to your own. And what Brueggemann says is that's not the story of the Bible. The story is there's more than enough. In fact, there's an abundance. And he gives the example of Joseph in Egypt talking to Pharaoh and saying there's going to come a time when there's not enough. And that puts fear into Pharaoh's heart. And he puts Joseph in charge of accumulating the grain harvested every year, not all of it, but some, and putting it aside and putting it aside and holding on to it and grasping more and building up a hoard. And all of this grain allows Pharaoh then later to control the destinies of people beyond his kingdom, because they come to Egypt because they don't have enough and they see it there in Egypt. And the Israelites come and they barter away their animals, and then they barter away their children, and then they barter away themselves. And that's how they become slaves in Egypt. But Brueggemann says the real story is how the Israelites flourished in Egypt. They were an abundant people, and they grew, and they had children, and their generations grew up. And the Egyptians became concerned because they said, even before our midwives can get to the Hebrew women and terminate those pregnancies, they've already popped out. It's just overflowing life. And that is what is in the promise to the children of Israel. You will be an abundant people witnessing to my generosity. So that's one example there of more than enough. The second one comes from St. Paul, 2 Corinthians 9:8. God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. And it struck me that one of the Greek scholars I was reading about this particular verse says one of those words could easily be translated, you may be content with enough, and thereby have an abundance for every good work. Suggesting that maybe contentment is really the secret sauce that allows abundance to flow to us and through us to others. That's one of our generosity enzymes, if you will, contentment as well as gratefulness. So the abundance that is offered is not only so that the church can move forward on mission, the abundance is offered so that we will know that God created generously. God made the first move in generosity. And if we become content with God, then there is enough. There's even more than enough for every good work. There's abundance.
Yeah. So the first thing we have to do is clarify who we are as a congregation, that we identify our reason for being, not the global reason for being. We all know the Great Commission, but our particular reason for being in our context. As we do that, then we invite people on the stewardship path with us, on the generosity path with us, so that they can really give to help us meet the needs of the church, the community, and the greater world. And then lastly, in our conversation here, remembering that we serve a loving and giving God, and that there has always been enough. We may have squandered it, but there's always been enough. So if we know why we're giving, if we know how to give, and then understand that our giving is going to meet needs, not just check a box on an envelope, if you will.
Correct.
And then understand that there's more than enough, that we can jump into this path, as you call it, this giving path. I love that. I love the community invitation on the giving path. We're all on the giving path together, I believe,
Right.
is how you said that. So,
Right.
last words for us as we consider these two basics of giving.
Well, I think one way people may respond to what I've just said is, well, I know churches that are struggling. I know individual Christians that are struggling. So what's your answer for that? Well, I've got two examples that I'll share. I have more, but I did a financial review for a church years ago in Washington, D.C., and they were feeling so bad because they didn't have enough, and they felt like they had done all they could to encourage giving, and what are we going to do, and how should we pare down? And so I said, well, let me just see your balance sheet and see what's on the balance sheet. And I went through the balance sheet, and all of a sudden something just jumped right out at me. There was this condominium that was owned by the church, free and clear, and they were using it in some ways. But I says, what's this? And they says, well, that's a gift from a church member years ago. I says, what's the dollar value on that? And they so, we're in DC, it's kind of pricey. It was over $500,000.
Oh my goodness.
And their budget was $500,000. And I says, you're not poor.
Right.
I says, you're rich. You're just rich in ways you don't realize. And if you can get creative and think of ways to utilize the value in this property, and I'm not going to tell you to sell it or rent it or whatever, but there are creative ways to extract value, then you've solved your problem right there.
Yep.
Another example would be, I know people who are just hurting and whatever, financially. They can't get on the giving path. They need the receiving path. And, I agree with that. Because if you'll recall, we had this thing called the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. I was a member of a church. Pastor was a good friend of mine. We could see what was coming. And I says, Pastor, I think what would benefit your congregation is to start a fund immediately. We were just entering the recession, but people were losing jobs. Companies were closing. It was obvious this was going to be hard. And they began promoting a ministry fund for hurting families within their church. And within 6 months, they had a critical mass of funds. They had enlisted members in the congregation who had social work background, who were used to confidential conversations.
Yeah.
And they were able to respond to the needs of their members with outright gifts, if you will, not loans, but gifts. We know you're hurting, and here's what we have to allocate to you, and we will help you find other sources as well.
Yep.
And that worked beautifully for 2 years.
Awesome.
So I think when people in our churches are hurting, it's us, the members, who take care of them.
Yes. And we can model that generosity for our church people.
Yeah.
And then invite them into generosity with us. Man, what a rich moment with you today. Thank you so much, Ruben, for always you're the overflow from you is much more than many of us who've studied this for years. So thank you so much for the beginning of this conversation. Over the next few weeks, we will have more. We'll unpack these basics. You'll see us on Facebook. You'll see us on YouTube. And you'll see us at boprosser.com under the devotionals tab. So, Ruben, thanks so much. Great energy and great conversation. Can't wait to continue our sharing in the weeks to come.
I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about the Generosity 7 some more.
All right. Thanks, Ruben. Bo Prosser here, the Center for Christian Education. Till I see you again, keep on rocking.